Walk us through what's going on in President Obama's mind. How important is Ukraine, and how willing is he going to be to take action if he can't get support from the EU, which is in a much, much more difficult position?
Eric, he absolutely needs help from and support from the EU, because the action he can take is not putting troops in the ground. We're not going to do that, that's for sure. It is to kick the Russians out of the G8, to certainly impose very tough economic sanctions that bite. And, you know, in the modern world, we've learned that sanctions can bite. Exhibit A would be Iran. So I think that he has to do that in concert with the EU, which in many respects, Eric, has a lot more at stake here even than the United States does.
So how important is it for the president to show leadership here? Does, you know, America versus Russia, it's a great storyline going back to the Cold War, but, you know, we're trying to get a sense of how far he's willing to go. And I think, Al, you've got a much better idea of that than we do here.
Well, I think the narrative gets twisted sometimes. It's really not the United States versus Russia. It's the United States and Europe versus what Putin is trying to do there. And look, this is bad for us in the sense that we could use Russian help with Syria and Iran, not that they're necessarily going to give it. I would argue that probably over the long run, this is much worse for Putin. Putin could get himself into a real mess here. Remember Afghanistan. Remember America going into Iraq. Sometimes these incursions don't work very well. We don't know how far he's going to go. But this is, you know, Russia is not an economic power, Eric. And if you put sanctions, and if they have problems with Europe with supplying energy, this could really drive that country into far greater despair.
Wait a second. Sorry. Who's in control here? Putin is the guy with his hand on the valve that opens up the gas supply to Europe. If he decides to crank that valve shut, I'm trying to understand the point that you were making about this could go all very wrong for Putin. If he views everything as a zero-sum game, then, you know, isn't he going to be the one to try to force the Europeans into a position of weakness?
That's a dicey game, Eric. He may try to do that, but who needs European money? Who desperately needs European money? And I'll tell you what else. The oligarchs in Europe aren't vacationing in Russia. They don't have their money in Russia. It's the oligarchs in Russia who have their investments in their vacation homes in Europe. And if he cuts off that energy supply, where does Russia get money? This is not a strong country economically.
Al, I want to pull in what Lindsey Graham said over the weekend and get a sense from you, is this going to devolve all into politics? Take a look.
Every time the president goes on national television and threatens Putin or anyone like Putin, everybody's eyes roll, including mine. We have a weak and indecisive president that invites aggression.
What do you think, Al?
Well, looks like the answer is yes, Steph, doesn't it? Lindsey Graham has a point on Syria. Certainly, the president drew a red line and then didn't do anything about it. However, and this is a big however, what would Senator Graham do? Does he want to put American troops there in Crimea? I think not. So therefore, I think the rhetoric is easy. What you can actually do is harder. And I think it almost all revolves around diplomatic and economic actions.
So, Al, where do you think we stand here? John Kerry is going to head to Kiev. Is this for show? Does he really have any leverage? What do you think we're going to be saying 5 days from now?
He has limited leverage, and the complication in Kiev, of course, is that that's a pro-European, a pro-American government, such as it is, but it's a terribly inept government. There's great chaos there. That too is an economic basket case. What we first have to find out is how far Putin is going to go. Is he going to stop at Crimea? Is he going to try to take all of eastern Ukraine? So it has to play out a lot in the next week to see where we'll be. But I really think look, it's a terrible situation, and it's destabilizing, as Secretary Kerry said. I don't think, however, this is a big win for Vladimir Putin.